management could clearly be having an overriding impact. And time outside the pen, that's where we first started thinking 3.5 hours, 3 to 4 hours a day outside the pen. If you break that barrier, the cow's got to sacrifice things. And we developed really nice data sets which showed that. It was usually resting time that the cow had to use to take up the slack. And then later you realize, well, when she's lying down, she's also ruminating. So it's a double negative effect on the cow. Aside from all the eating behavior and dry matter intake issues, you start running into problems with just resting time.
Hello and welcome back to the Dairy Podcast Show, brought to you by Wisenetics. My name is Barry Bradford from Michigan State University, and today I'm very honored to welcome to the show Dr. Rick Brandt. Rick is a trustee now at the Miner Institute and also a trustee of the William H. Miner Foundation. And we'll get into some detail about what that means and why he's in those roles. But Rick, thanks a lot for joining today.
Well, it's my pleasure, Barry. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, let's start back with how you got into ag or dairy cattle in the first place. Is that something you were born into, or did you migrate your way here?
No, I guess you'd say I was born into it. I was born and raised on a very small dairy farm in northern New York, upstate New York. And actually, it's one of the reasons why I ended up in Shazy at Miner Institute, because it was coming home for me. So yeah, I grew up on a dairy farm, and it just seemed natural. I guess maybe like a lot of farm kids, I wanted to be a veterinarian, right? So I went to Cornell, our state's land grant, New York State's, and by just my good fortune, right? Guess who my academic advisor was a fellow named Peter Van Soest. And so, pretty quickly within a year or so, my interest in vet school waned, and it couldn't help but increase in terms of research, especially forage research, right? That was, I think every life has a couple of moments where you're just unaccountably lucky, right? And that was one of them. I didn't realize it at the time, but boy, having Van Soest as an academic advisor was mind expanding in any number of ways, right? in good ways.
I have to ask, his reputation in our field is like kind of the classic scientist that could solve an impossible theorem, but maybe couldn't tie his shoes type of thing. This may be not fair, but a little bit like crazy is definitely a reputation.
Well, there's people, his grad students knew him more than I did. As an undergraduate, I can say he was eccentric for sure, and brilliant. I'm sure he's the most brilliant person I have ever come close to meeting, right? Sure. But I just was trying to hang on. Every time I went in there for some advising, right, I just tried to keep up, because he would just go a mile a minute. He'd quickly put to bed, like, sign up for this organic chem class, whatever, get the basics out of the road. Then he'd start talking about things. And I think he just assumed there was a lot more intelligence up here than there was. But I'd walk out there just with my head spinning, going, I just wanted to know what section of organic chemistry to take. And really now I'm thinking about, particle size and NDF, and oh my gosh, so brilliant. Definitely a unique mold for that individual.
I was just like, oh, he was an undergrad advisor. That kind of surprised me. But obviously,
well, lucky for me for there. Yeah.
Okay, so that kind of got you interested more in the scientific aspects of dairy production, and so I assume he encouraged you to look at grad school. Oh
yeah, absolutely. So I ended up going to Purdue University. Not a huge dairy school, but it's funny. Back then, we're talking, early 1980s, right? Mm-hmm. They had a lot of dairy people still at the end of their career, because very quickly it kind of waned away. And Purdue is still a great school, but not a hub of dairy. But, in the 1980s, it really still was. And I was lucky because a lot of these folks just had so much time to devote. Again, being lucky, my advisor was great. And another person I met there who was part of my academic team, not my advisor, was a fellow named Jack Albright, and I have to say, he is probably to dairy cattle behavior that Van Soest would be to forages for sure. A little more straight-laced probably, but anyway. He began to open my eyes toward the importance of management, right? It's not all about forages and forage quality and particle size, Rick. Actually, the cow's behavior might impact how she responds to the ration. And I remember hearing that going, boy, Dr. Albright, that doesn't make any sense to me. But again, lucky, right? Because it opened my eyes relatively early that there's more to it than just nutrition, right? As important as that is, of course. So, yeah. So anyway, then I spent a couple of years, not quite 2 years, at the U.S. Dairy Forage Research Center with Dave Mertens. Of course, everybody in the audience would know him. And again, very lucky. He was on my Ph.D. committee, actually, as an outside person, but spent a lot of time delving into dynamics of fiber digestion, as you might guess, a little bit of modeling, but mostly developing in vitro systems for NDF digestion and looking at starch-fiber interactions. And so you can imagine, I went to Nebraska as my first job out of the chute as an extension dairy specialist in Nebraska, that big dairy mecca, right? But again, it was fun to be there. Had a dairy that I could do almost anything I wanted to on it at the time. But I came there already to do fiber research, and that's kind of how things started. And this is like 1990 when I showed up in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Natural Biologics is using cutting-edge science to deliver cost-effective solutions for the animal health and productivity challenges you face. For conventional or organic production systems, Natural Biologics can help support rumen health and immune function, mitigate pathogens, and increase production efficiency. Visit naturalbiologics.com to learn more.
Fantastic. So then, that's about the period that, and I think you already kind of led into this with meeting Dr. Albright, but you started to have some interest in the interactions of behavior and nutrition at that time. And how did you tell us a little bit about maybe the first studies where you were trying to actually turn that into an experiment and a design?
Yeah, well, so when I got there, I was really focused on physically effective fiber, non-forage fiber sources. And what really started the thinking about ration and management interaction were really, it was my extension side of my appointment, right? Because I'd get these calls from producers and people in the field, and sometimes they were about ration formulation, but mostly it was some variant of the question, Barry, right? Why isn't my ration working? And so that's really where it started. So we started to look at, I had a grad student named Bill Madsky, late 90s, early 2000s, just before I moved to Miner. And we did a lot of the work on farms because our dairy at UNL was pretty small, tie stall dairy. But anyway, we started thinking about time budgeting and time outside the pen. And it was so obvious with some of these behavior watches our students did that management could clearly be having an overriding impact. And time outside the pen, that's where we first started thinking 3.5 hours, 3 to 4 hours a day outside the pen. If you break that barrier, the cow's got to sacrifice things. And we developed really nice data sets which showed that. It was usually resting time that the cow had to use to take up the slack. And then later you realize, well, when she's lying down, she's also ruminating. So it's a double negative effect on the cow, aside from all the eating behavior and dry matter intake issues. You start running into problems with just resting time. Yeah. So it started there on farm, right? And then when I had the chance to move to Miner Institute, that would have been in 2003 as Charlie Sniffen retired. That was fortuitous because UNL was fantastic, but I don't think we could have done the work we did without the facilities and the team and the resources that the Institute allowed us to engage, right? To start looking at some of these big factors in the cow's management environment that affected her response to the feed, to the nutrition and the ration.
Maybe we should explain. Certainly, a lot of people in the audience would be very familiar with the Miner Institute, but maybe not everybody is. And it's a little bit of a unique research facility. And could you tell us just a little bit about how that was started and what it looks like today? Yeah, well, real briefly, it became an institute in the late 1950s, but its vision goes back to William Miner, who created this farm called Heart's Delight Farm. It was a beautiful model farm at the turn of the last century. And he was a millionaire many times over from his patents in the railroad industry. And he had grown up in Shazy. And so he called it Heart's Delight Farm because clearly he loved the place, right? He made his millions in Chicago, and that's where Miner Enterprises as a railroading company still exists. They produce implements, so-called, I guess, for boxcars and so forth. But he created a coupling device, like a shock absorber system. You can see my hands here, right? Yeah. And very quickly, almost every boxcar in the U.S. in the late 1800s had this. And so he was off and running. But he created this model farm. And it's a beautiful story. We have a nice
exhibit their museum. But just long story short, his vision for that farm was always that it would evolve after his death, because he'd set up this foundation to take over. It would evolve into a research institute, a college. Okay. Well, by the time it got developed in the late 50s, the idea of a freestanding college had already been done by the State University of New York system in New York. But it certainly evolved into what we know today as Miner Institute. So there's the research and the education component and a demonstration. And that goes back to Miner's original vision. So it's kind of neat that what we're doing today really is carrying on his vision, whether it's the research or our teaching side of things. But you mentioned I'm on the foundation board. I will just say this, that about a little over half of the Institute's annual budget is from foundation funds, which is sort of such a wonderful leverage that the Institute has, right? The rest of the income would be sale of milk, cows, and then a lot of grants and contracts like any research program would have. But having that 50 to 60% of our budget from foundation resources allows us to go after things in a preliminary manner, or just to kind of get answers to things which may not be fundable. You know what I mean, Barry? And that's the beauty of it. So we're very applied, and we have animal science and ruminant nutrition, like myself. We have young stock, mature cows. We have people like Heather Dan there, of course, and others. And we also have the agronomy side as well, so crops as well as nutrient management. So I'd invite anybody who's listening to come visit if they've never been there. Maybe come in June or July, because honestly, winter's not all that much fun. But it's a wonderful place with the facilities, about 600 head dairy farm, camera systems we were able to put in, and some like the Snolda systems, so you can track where cows, if they have any preference in location, use of stalls. There's so much stuff we can do from the behavior management side as we do our basic nutrition work.
Okay, so you mentioned, you were doing active research there at Miner for about 20 years. Kind of walk us through, if you would, some of the key studies that you designed there that gave us more insights into these concepts around time budgets and how management interacts with nutrition.
Yeah, so when I came there with the team, we knew a lot about time budgets already from our work and other people's work. And the big thing we started out with, it's hard to believe, but 20 years ago, stocking density was already a big issue. It's still with us too. And so it seemed like that was a place to start right there, because stocking density has got to be one of the biggest components of any management environment. We happen to have 4-row barns at the Institute, but a lot of the New York dairy industry, a lot of our industry in general, is 6-row barns. So we started out looking at the effect of stocking density, and we tried to do headlocks or bunk space and free stalls at the same time. A lot of the initial work at British Columbia and other places separated those out. And I guess you need that basic work. We were very applied. Like if you overcrowd the cows, either by chaining off headlocks or shutting headlocks or chaining off stalls, or throwing more animals into the pen, what do you see? And it was pretty obvious to us that very quickly the primiparous cows are most affected. Right? They're the least able to adapt, especially at the feed bunk. They just can't eat as quickly as an older cow can. And they're so easily displaced. And nowadays you go, yes, naturally. But 20 years ago, people weren't quite sure of that. And a thread running through all of our work has been whether it's a lame cow. We've done a lot of lame cows versus sound cows at different stocking densities, or parity at different stocking densities. What's it do to behavior? And then some performance metrics in health, rumen pH. But a thread has been, you can calculate a stocking density. So you count the stalls, for instance, you count the cows. It's easy. But what stocking density does the animal perceive? And I'm convinced, absolutely, based on our work and others, that it's different. It's so different than what we calculate in many cases, especially the younger animals, right? Because you can see that they're not at ease when they're lying down and resting. For instance, we've had data which shows that rumination time in the stall can be, 40% or more depressed, right, on the same diet for first half heifers that are lying in stalls that they know are preferred by dominant cows. And so what's that mean long term? What are the consequences of that in a management system, right? We need to factor things like that in. And the one big thing that really we didn't see coming is Matt Campbell did some series of trials looking at the interaction of different components of, say, fiber in the diet, physically effective fiber and stocking density. And as a main effect, overcrowding had a much greater impact on behavior, chewing behavior particularly, and rumen pH than fiber. So how is that for a paradigm buster, really, That's something when we saw that, we just had to sit down and really think for a while what we're doing to our cows, right?
If I understood you right, like you're saying younger cows in an overcrowding situation, even if they're laying down, they're less likely to be ruminating than if there's plenty of room.
Yeah, and that was in the absence of overcrowding. Okay, That was just the basics of that sort of study was just we can identify which stalls are preferred in a pen. That's been done by a number of people. And then you look at who uses those stalls, and it's mostly the dominant cows or cows that for whatever reason are more dominant. They can be older, they can be healthier, whatever. But the first calf heifers oftentimes are not as likely to use these preferred stalls, which typically are by the feed or they're just out of the sunlight if it's a 3-row pen, things like that. But when they do get into those stalls, which are preferred by the dominant cows, these subordinate cows, the rumination time is depressed. And we've seen that in a couple of our studies. And then you layer on stocking density, overcrowding on top of that, and it really gets bad. It gets bleak for these animals because then you see large reductions in rumination time. You can see changes in eating time. What we always notice is resting time goes down when a cow is overcrowded, especially subordinate cow. And we didn't realize it at the time over all these studies, but in the last couple of years, looking back, we thought, well, the thing that always is negatively affected is recumbent rumination. And that was something I talked about recently at Cornell Nutrition Conference. And you're thinking, yeah, so they can ruminate standing up, lying down. But our data with pH would say cows which are lying in the stalls have better rumen pH. And that's the other part of the thing I didn't say earlier. As a main effect, stocking density is more powerful in terms of its effect on the ruminal environment than, say, PE-NDF, physically effective NDF. And as you look at where the cow ruminates, beautiful graph that Matt Campbell put together, as you look at proportion of rumination in the stall versus, say, hours per day that pH is less than 5.8, if you get the majority of the rumination in the stall, hours per day drops down to like 2 hours per day. So it's hardly something you'd worry about. But if it's 50% or less, it can be 10 hours a day that pH is below 5.8. That was our cut point in these studies, for Sarah. And so it just, to me, I didn't see that coming. But that's really been the basis for a lot of what we've been thinking about in the last several years from a stocking density and management standpoint is, you see changes in behavior, but it's affecting the rumen environment. A lot of it could be related to recumbent rumination or lack thereof, certainly changes in feeding behavior. And what's that do to things like, energetics of the cow, right? Fiber digestion, all that sort of thing. We see less de novo synthesis, right, when cows are overcrowded. So that tells you that there's probably less fibrolysis going on, right? Less acetate being produced as a result of fiber fermentation, et cetera. So it's opened up my eyes tremendously, Barry, in terms of management environment, and having an expectation that cows are going to respond in a certain way to your formulated ration.
If a cow's laying down but not ruminating, do you attribute that to anxiety? Is she too nervous to be comfortable enough to ruminate, or how do you think about that?
Well, that could be part of it. Of course, they're not going to be ruminating all the time, right? Yeah. Because they do lie down longer than they ruminate. It's just that in a cow's ideal world, you'd say, and this goes back to some of the work Jack Albright published based on Balch's work back in the 50s, I suspect. But, 80 to 90% or more of rumination time should occur while externally recumbent, right? And ideally, if you get into the weeds, with a little bit of a left side laterality, because that positions the rumen and the esophagus and everything just presumably perfectly within the body cavity for the process of rumination. But yeah, so you'd like to see 9% or more, right? But she certainly will be lying down without ruminating, for sure. Yeah. But and that to me, I would never have guessed that a few years ago, that rumination time, because we have SCR collars in our herd, you track that per day, and it's beautiful. It's wonderfully useful on the farm. But we need to go one step further and really look at posture or where the cows ruminate. So we need to have some technology, precision technology, I think, which allows us to track recumbent rumination along with eating time, right?
Struggling with post-calving challenges and reproductive performance? Don't wait for problems. Protect uterine health proactively. AHV offers natural science-backed solutions and tailored on-farm support, improving fertility and performance. Learn more at ahvint.com.
So I think, you're talking about some concepts that very few other people work on, is this: how do we build a management environment and a diet together that support adequate chewing behavior? So maybe you can talk about, first of all, you're arguing this should actually be a management goal. I don't think, most dairy producers wouldn't be sitting there with a KPI on chewing behavior, right? So, why is that important? And then do you have a set of 4 or 5 key things that you have to achieve to optimize that?
Absolutely. So sort of where I sit today as a trustee, I'm no longer as active in the research realm as I used to be, but still intellectually, this is where we're still going, is we've been calling it precision chewing management, joking a little bit that we need to have some precision aspect to it. And actually, as you think about it, it's not a bad name, because coming back to your point here, we need the technology, the management, the monitoring technology, look at eating time. And probably that's obvious, right? Because that's related to intake, and we know what good behavior looks like. And specifically, we know to have optimal, efficient feeding behavior, the cow needs to be able to consume her dry matter intake within 3 to 5 hours a day. That's been known for a long time. A number of studies have shown that. But on the other side, if we want to get that recumbent rumination, we need to get, the 11 to 12, 14 hours a day resting time. We need to get the rumination occurring then. So we need to monitor that, as I said. And the reason why it should be a KPI, monitoring those, and then making management changes to make sure we have those in balance or with the right complementarity. So you have 3 to 5 hours eating time. The cow gets it done, because if she takes longer than 5 hours a day, you can guess she's going to give up resting time, which is going to mess up time available for recumbent rumination. And what I need to add, besides the pH part of that, I think of Trevor DeVries's great research that's been published in the last couple of years on McWilliams et al. Paper, where they found that cows with the same rumination, but those which achieve more of that resting, lying down, eat more, have greater dry matter intake, and they produce milk with greater fat and protein. Okay, so you see that it all ties together. It's not just, she didn't evolve to be ruminating while lying down just for the fun of it. Actually, we can harness what's natural for the cow and improve our economics at the same time. So that's why I think we need to monitor it. And we know that relative balance, if you will, between eating time, getting it done efficiently, effectively, right, is management, stocking, density, feed, push-ups, all of that, as well as then the characteristics of the forage and the diet. And that's the new part we've layered on there, right? Things like getting right fiber content, digestibility, and particle size of the feed in the TMR, so she can get that eating done in no more than 5 hours a day. And then she has plenty of time, if she's not too overcrowded, right? And she has comfortable stalls to get in that stall and get that recumbent rumination. And then the cow, I think, is set up to be able to maximally respond to her genetic potential, as well as the formulated ration. And that's kind of where we sit today, Barry. I don't know if that makes sense, because I know you're one of the best nutritionists in the country yourself. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, does that lead to very concrete advice in terms of theoretical length of chop for your silage and that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say if anyone's interested, go to the Cornell Nutrition Conference website, because actually the paper we put in, the Miner group, has all that in there. But truly, we have a sliding scale, and that's the way I think about it. So if you have, more mature forages, well, you chop it finer. You think, well, I've known that forever. But we're getting to the point now where we can kind of quantitate that, right? So with a certain digestibility, or our metric we follow is really undegraded NDF 240 hours. So UNDF 240, that's just become such a common metric, and it itself is sensitive to maturity and growing conditions. It's nice to monitor that for any number of reasons, but as it gets higher, we know how much to dial back theoretical length of cut, for instance. And then you can shake it out with the Penn State boxes, and we have a pretty good feeling what kind of a particle distribution is optimal for a given forage type. Or if you have drier corn silage, chop it finer, and we have a pretty good idea how that should shake out to maintain intake, right? Whether it's high UNDF or just too dry, the things of that nature, okay? And really from the cow's perspective, I'd say it's what it boils down to is minimize the top screen, the 19 millimeter sieve of the Penn States, because that's likely to be sorted. And those are the particles which take longer to eat. And then really focus on the 8 millimeter, because all the data I've seen, including our own, would say that the cow is going to take a wide range of diets before she swallows while she's eating and reduce the particle size of the bolus to about the same particle size as the particles that are retained on the 8 millimeter sieve of the Penn State particle separator. So to me, that's sort of the final part. That's what the forage, that's what the TMR should look like. Over 50% on the 8 millimeter, minimize the top, then the 4 millimeter in the pan, you have more flexibility, but it's the top two that I think really tell the story, especially with our hay crop and corn silage based rations that we feed so much of here in North America, right? At least in the US.
Yep. I just want to reiterate that point because I remember hearing you say that the first time at some point and thinking, oh, I never thought about it, but it makes perfect sense, is that having particles longer than a cow's ever going to swallow anyway isn't going to help with the scratch factor in the rumen. So if we can get that sweet spot where she can swallow it quickly, but it's still some particle size, that's ideal.
That's been the thing. When you lengthen particle size, you're not necessarily increasing rumination, you're increasing eating time. Right. Which may not be the best thing for the cow, especially if she's overcrowded, maybe. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Fascinating. Anything else on that you wanted to squeeze in, Rick? Is there one take-home point you want people to remember and start working on their farms?
Well, I'd say really take a look at particle size. Well, no, everyone knows what the fiber is or should be in their forages and their TMR. And then really think about, are we making the job easier for the cow to eat? And then make sure she can ruminate and lie down. So really this last part to me, if we can implement that on every farm, and I guess whether it's overcrowded or not, what can we do to do workarounds, and what absolutely has to be optimized in the management environment? Because I'm convinced that if we don't get this last part right, the cows will respond to a better formulated ration, but you're leaving a lot on the table in terms of components and intake and efficiency, I think. Right? The day-to-day, to me, that's where the take-home. And you can do the best job by satisfying her natural behaviors. And from a forage standpoint, particle size, mimic the cow. Think about what she naturally does at the feed bunk, chewing and swallowing, and make her job easier. That's anthropomorphic. I shouldn't end that way. But if you make her job easier, I think it's going to be one of those herds where everybody really wants to have a part of it, right? Because it's just an easy to manage dairy. That's how I look at it.
It's time for our famous three.
Every dairy producer knows longevity doesn't happen by accident. AgriComfort, the cow comfort specialists, design rubber flooring and stall products that help support mobility and keep cows productive longer. It's about creating an environment where cows can perform year after year, because when she stays healthy and productive longer, that becomes part of your story. AgriComfort, because her longevity is your legacy. Visit agri-comfort.com to learn more.
All right. Well, of course, we have our three famous questions we have to throw at you now. So first of all, what's your favorite dairy-related book or resource?
Well, I already kind of alluded to that. Since I was an undergrad at Cornell and took Van Su's class, I've got to say either the green original edition or now since 94, the second edition. Every desk I've ever had has had Nutritional Ecology of the Ruminant sitting right on it. And I'd say once a week I open it up, either with a question or if I'm just sitting at the desk doing some work and I just need to relax a little bit. This sounds wonky, but you can always almost randomly open that textbook up. I don't know if you ever did. And there's something I haven't seen before in there, or I've forgotten it, right? It's so chock full of stuff. And to me, that's the one thing I tell all my grad students: get that book and hang on to it. Right.
That's pretty cool.
If you're going to stay in nutrition, ruminant nutrition.
Good inspiration to keep learning. What about your favorite book or resource outside of agriculture?
Yeah, well, I read a lot of literature, but that's probably not the best answer. I mean, everybody hopefully does that to relax sometimes. But I didn't do this until I went to Miner. Suddenly I realized I was part of a team. Actually, I had to lead a team. And my communication skills weren't that great, leadership skills. So we started reading a lot of those books. But I'll tell you, of all the books we went through as a management team and research team at Miner, I'd go back to the classic. And I tell people that I work with or students, get a copy of Carnegie's old, what is it called? How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's almost become a cliche, but there's so much embedded in that book about calling people by their name, how you can do better if you don't worry about taking credit for everything, just all the basics of teamwork. And I found that to be just as useful in any career I've had as any knowledge I've had to use, right? Any technical knowledge. So,
all right. And last of all, in your opinion, what sets successful dairy professionals apart from those who are less successful?
Well, that's a good one. All I can say is think about some of the grad students I've had over the years, and they've all gone on to be professional in some manner, right? Either in industry or academia and so forth. The ones that really have done the best, they're all brilliant, but it's passion, right? They're so passionate, and that's just the sort of person when they're thinking about what they're doing. They're not just going, okay, I got to get this project done, but they're, oh, this is my life right now, and they bring it into their job, right? Whatever it is, in my case, forages, whatever. I just can't talk enough about that. And then the other part that goes with that, because you can be passionate, but I really think you need to have that, and then the ability to work hard. I've rarely seen somebody be as successful as they could be, as they have the potential for, unless they're willing to put in the hours and just the time it takes. And it's not always physical labor, right? It can be intellectual labor, whatever it is. They're willing to do whatever it takes to be successful. And I think that would be good advice for my own kids and just grad students, professionals, whatever. So be passionate. And I think if you are, then work hard.
Great answer.
That sounds baby boomer enough, doesn't it? Work hard. No, but I think the people like what they're doing. That just comes naturally to them.
Right. Yeah. If those things go together, it doesn't hurt so much to work hard, right?
Yeah. Right. So.
Yeah. Very good. Well, this has been a fun conversation, Rick. Thanks so much for being on the show today.
I appreciate it.
So this has been another episode of the Dairy Podcast Show with our guest, Dr. Rick Brandt from Miner Institute. And if you haven't followed or liked the show already, make sure you hit the button today so you don't miss the next episode. And we'll see you next time.